So this year, Johnny, my sixth grader, wanted to join the robotics team. And I knew they were looking for a coach. And so I thought this will be a pretty intense selection process. But I thought, I can do this. I can help out. And so they asked me, the first question was, now, have you been trained in the required training if you work with kids in the Archdiocese? And I said, yes. And they said, good, you're hired. And then they said, well, actually, you're not hired because it's a volunteer position, which I knew. But they didn't ask me if I knew anything about robotics. And I didn't. They didn't ask me if I had an engineering background, which I don't. They didn't ask me if I could program computers, which I can't. So I was clearly an unlikely candidate. And yet, I was chosen. In our gospel from Luke today, we hear kind of an interesting introduction to John the Baptist. He talks about all the important, prominent people of that time. And then he introduces John. It's almost as if he's saying, look at the distinction. Normally, people would look to those people who are so important, prominent. But God chose John, an unlikely candidate. And yet, what does John do? He goes throughout the whole region, spreading the message about Jesus. John's whole life pointed to Jesus. And folks, that's our invitation too. You may say, I'm a pretty unlikely candidate for that. But you have been chosen. John talked about challenge and hope. It's very similar to what we're doing in Advent. There's great challenge and there's great hope. So let's start with the challenge. We heard in the first reading about mountains being made low. We heard it in the gospel. Mountains and hills being made low. And then gorges and valleys being filled up. Now, I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to imagine something like that in my mind because I've been to the mountains and I see the enormity of it. But what's a little bit easier to imagine is our heart. Because isn't it true that when we're focused on ourselves, when we're focused on wanting control, when we're focused on unforgiveness, fear, anxiety, pride, isn't it true that when we do that, we create a mountain, a huge obstacle between us and God? And isn't it also true that when we focus on God and when we focus on others, when we focus on being merciful, being vulnerable, surrendering, we are in fact filling the valley to make things level. It's really about more of Jesus and less of us. I think that's the formula for Advent. More of Jesus and less of us. But here's the good news. You're on the right track. My hope for this Advent season. Last week you filled that out. And if I were to guess, every one of those cards said something about more Jesus and less me. And certainly this week, what is one thing I can do this next week to bring hope to others? More about Jesus and less about us. If we can do that this Advent season, we will, in fact, be like John the Baptist, who made a straight path for Jesus. And we can truly become pilgrims of hope.